I'm honored and delighted to address the graduating class of 2018 at Harvard Chan School of Public Health. I must say, I was very moved yesterday when I went along to the awards ceremony, and I heard something I've never heard before, and it was really, really well done. 13 students took the preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and spoke that preamble in 13 languages. And I gather you do this each year. It's a wonderful example. And actually, I just want to complete, after the preamble is Article 1 of the Universal Declaration. And the first sentence of Article 1 captures for me what human rights means. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And once you appreciate that. And I also want to note the way in which you made space at the very beginning of this convocation ceremony for a voice on behalf of Indigenous peoples and to honor the land. That too is something I haven't heard at convocations or commencement ceremonies. So, well done, the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. As I see it, you're in the right place at the right time. And you have the talent, the training, the commitment, and the expertise to meet the challenges ahead. And listening to your student speaker, he also was challenging you to live up to this. But more about that later. Allow me a nostalgic moment as I reflect on having been 50 years ago part of the class of 1968, graduating with my master's from Harvard Law School. I've often referred to the positive impact which that year in Harvard had on me. Many of my American contemporaries were critical of what they viewed as an immoral war in Vietnam. They were heading not for the lucrative Wall Street law firms, but to tackle racial discrimination and to work on poverty programs in the south of this country. We mourned the assassination of Martin Luther King in April that year, and were further shocked by the assassination of Robert Kennedy just after we graduated. But what impressed me most of all was that young people around me in Harvard were prepared to take on responsibility, to show leadership, and to be determined to make great changes in society. And that was different from the Ireland I had grown up in, where young people were told to wait your turn, wait, now you're in your 30s, wait a bit longer, now you're in your early 40s, wait a bit longer. It was different. And it seems to me that you are graduating at a similar time of deep uncertainty, but of great potential for a better future. As you know, the international community faces a great challenge in stabilizing the climate. We need to reach zero carbon emissions by 2050 in order to have the best possible chance of keeping warming well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and hopefully stabilizing at 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, the commitments made by countries to date in their nationally determined contributions, NDCs, national targets for curbing climate-altering greenhouse gases leave a considerable gap between the commitments pledged and the action needed. If we continue with business as usual, we're on track for at least a 3.5 degrees warmer world compared with pre-industrial levels. This would lead to extreme and potentially irreversible impacts on natural ecosystems and on human health. Basically, it would be catastrophic, and that is what we are headed for unless we can bend the curve and change. President Trump's decision to pull the United States out of the Paris Agreement, although it cannot take full effect until the 4th of November 2020, was a severe blow to climate action. I do note that your next presidential election is the 3rd of November 2020, so maybe things can change. And in fact, that decision to pull out of the Paris Agreement was met by two very positive responses. every other country committed to staying the course, and here in the United States, a broad alliance of states, cities, business, philanthropy, universities, and civil society adopted a declaration called We Are Still In, which concludes as follows, and I quote, "It is imperative that the world know that in the United States, the actors that will provide the leadership necessary to meet our Paris commitment are found in city halls, state capitals, colleges and universities, investors and businesses. Together, we will remain actively engaged with the international community as part of the global effort to hold warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to accelerate the transition to a clean energy economy that will benefit our society, prosperity, and health." End quote. Climate change isn't just an issue of atmospheric science. It's also about human rights. Climate change undermines the enjoyment of the full range of human rights, from the right to life, to food, to shelter, and of course, to health. The situation is particularly acute for people living in vulnerable situations owing to geography, gender, age, race, poverty, disability, or social status. It's an injustice that the people who have contributed least to the causes of the problem suffer the worst impacts of climate change. The impacts of climate change on the right to health are now well understood. You'll recall the 2015 Lancet Commission on Health and Climate Change, which documents the direct impacts of heat stress, droughts, floods, and increasing frequency of intense storms on human health, as well as the indirect impacts on health caused by air pollution, spread of disease vectors, food and nutrition insecurity, and mental illness, among others. The central finding of the 2015 Lancet Commission is, and I quote, that tackling climate change would be the greatest global health opportunity of the 21st century. So acting on climate change makes sense for health reasons as well as environmental and economic reasons. And let's remember that we are the first generation to fully understand how serious the climate crisis is, and the last generation with time to be able to do something about it. That is the story. The fifth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, published in 2014, states with high confidence, and you know scientists, they never say absolutely definitely. High confidence is as much as you'll get. They state with high confidence that global warming has exacerbated health problems which already exist in our world. As this century continues, the IPCC experts expects climate change to lead to increases in ill health in many regions as compared to a planet without the impacts of climate change. Examples include greater likelihood of injury, disease, and death due to more intense heat waves and fires, increased likelihood of undernutrition resulting from diminished food production in poor regions, risks from lost work capacity and reduced labor productivity in vulnerable populations, and increased risks from food and waterborne diseases. The report also clarifies that while people all over the world are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, the poor and marginalized are the most vulnerable. And it was with this in mind that I believe the world needs to respond with a climate justice approach to shaping a global response that is rights-based in its actions to lower emissions and build resilience. All too often, it's women who are most at risk from the impacts of climate change on health. The report of Working Group 2 of the IPCC reveals that vulnerable groups, including women, will experience adverse effects on their health due to the impacts of climate change. It finds that regions of Africa with little financial resources, inadequate public health and healthcare systems, insufficient access to safe water and sanitation, food insecurity, and poor governance will be most affected by climate-induced health issues, and indeed I would say are most affected by climate-induced health issues. Poor populations in rural areas are most vulnerable to climate-induced health issues, and factors that increase vulnerability include inadequate or no mosquito protection and limited access to healthcare facilities offering effective diagnostic testing and treatment. So that's the global health challenge. But let me now come nearer to home and address the most fundamental issue facing the health and well-being of the American people. your country's failure to achieve universal health coverage. As you're very well aware in this audience, universal health coverage means that everybody receives the health services they need without suffering financial hardship. It's a key target within the Health Sustainable Development Goal. All countries, including the United States, signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN Summit in September 2015. Promoting UHC is one of the key priorities for the Elders, that group of independent former leaders founded by Nelson Mandela, which I have the great honour to be a member. We believe that health is a human right and that no one should be denied that right or forced into poverty to access the health care they need. In this hall, and indeed across this great country, you are blessed with talented medical professionals, world-class hospitals and research institutes, and an almost unparalleled capacity for technological innovation. Yet, at least 28 million of your fellow Americans don't have any health insurance coverage, despite health costs taking up 17.1% of this country's gross national product. As my dear friend and fellow elder, President Jimmy Carter, wrote last year, I was very pleased the Dean also quoted Jimmy Carter. He just wrote, "This is a national scandal." What makes it all the more unacceptable is that all other wealthy countries have achieved universal health coverage, and there are plenty of successful models for you to follow. You need only look to your northern neighbours in Canada, or across the Atlantic to Western Europe, to see reliable, efficient and affordable public health systems that cover the whole population and enjoy deep-rooted popular support. Why? Here's the basic question. Why should Americans not enjoy the same health rights as citizens of other countries around the globe? Why does the United States have a lower life expectancy than Costa Rica, which has UHC, and a higher maternal mortality rate than Kazakhstan? Why should healthcare costs remain the biggest cause of bankruptcy in the United States, thwarting the hopes and ambitions of hardworking families? I know fully that I'm preaching to the converted here when I tell you that the reasons are, of course, grounded in politics rather than medical practice. Americans desperately need leaders who have the courage and resilience to tackle the vested interests of the healthcare industry, pharmaceutical companies, and insurance companies, and extend health coverage to those who need it most. And I am heartened to see that this conversation is vigorously underway in the United States. Last November, a number of the elders convened a meeting at the Bellevue Public Hospital in New York to bring together doctors, politicians, and media to share best practice and support bold leadership. One of the elders was Gru Brundtland, and she asked me to remind you all that she is a graduate of the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. And this September, in San Francisco, we'll organize a similar event just before the Climate Summit, and I will be there with President Ricardo Lagos of Chile to blaze a trail for universal health coverage in California. I believe that despite the hyper-partisan arguments in Washington, momentum for universal health coverage is unstoppable in the United States. And this is why I say that you graduate at such a key moment for global health and for the achievement of universal health coverage here in the United States. Looking down at your bright young faces, knowing you've had the privilege of being educated at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, I have every confidence that you will meet the challenges head-on. You're in the right place at the right time. I warmly congratulate you, and I wish you every success and deep fulfillment in your lives. Thank you.